Getz, and I am a member of St. Bartholomew's. And, oh, thank you. I am the parish chancellor. And as was said in the squib in the e-newsletter, I am a church geek, admittedly so. And I am an 8-time deputy to the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. So the first time I went to the General Convention, I shouldn't move around a lot, that doesn't help you. First time I went to General Convention, my name badge looked like this.
Nice.
A few years later, when I went to General Convention, my name badge looked like this. This last year, when I went to General Convention, my name badge looked more like this. It's not that I'm a convention junkie or anything, but I'm a convention junkie. So what all of this is about, just to tell you, this is not the important church stuff, but throughout the course of General Convention, there are a lot of people there who are making statements about candidates for elected offices, about issues, about resolutions, about social issues and matters that are going to be considered at convention. And one of the ways they make those statements is with buttons. But it's also a way to acknowledge and recognize each other. So for example, one of my buttons, this one, where'd it go? This one. This is the symbol of the Diocese of Navajo Land, the Episcopal Church in Navajo Land, which actually is not a diocese, although it does have its own bishop. And I have the shield of the Diocese of San Joaquin, which invites us into solidarity with them because they were one of the marginalized dioceses a number of years ago and fought tooth and nail to remain as a strong diocese of the Episcopal Church, and successfully so. So that said, a couple of questions first. Are all of you aware of what the General Convention is? Okay, I got a little bit of each. Okay, so let's start there. Once every 3 years, the Episcopal Church meets in General Convention. That is the primary legislative session of the Episcopal Church, of the whole Episcopal Church. Our current acting bishop gets very annoyed when people describe it as the national church, because the Episcopal Church is actually in 16 countries. So we are the Episcopal Church. Some of us call it the wider church, some of us call it the global church. But if you say the national church in front of Bishop Jeffords Shorey, she'll clean your clock. Because we go far beyond the boundaries of the United States. We have a bishop of the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe. And you may remember that Bishop Kafidi was the primate of the Episcopal Church in the Middle East and Jerusalem. So the Episcopal Church is pretty gosh darn big. So once every 3 years, we meet in General Convention. And our General Convention is structured in a manner somewhat similar to the US government, which is no great surprise because it was formed at about the same time, in about 1789. So we have a House of Bishops, which consists of all bishops of the Episcopal Church, and we have a House of Deputies, which is an elected body consisting of half lay people and half members of the clergy, priests and deacons. And those are all elected by their dioceses. So on 8 separate occasions, you all, wisely or otherwise, have elected me to go to General Convention as one of your deputies. I have pretty much each time chaired our deputation, almost each time, which is a privilege. It gives you the opportunity to basically herd some cats and get our work done during General Convention. When we get to General Convention, we will have also been organized into a wide variety of committees around topics. There are committees on Constitution and canons, there are committees on social justice, there are committees on ministry, you name it, there's a committee for it. I have served on structure and governance, I have served on state of the church, I have served on Constitution. This last year, I was the chair of the committee on church-wide leadership. And what church-wide leadership dealt with this year was the question of whether or not the church should compensate the president of the House of Deputies. And then we also addressed a wide number of issues relating to bishops, to the Episcopal. So, they say it's 9 or 10 days. It's really 2 weeks, because you get there early, because some of the committee work begins early. And for me, when it ends on Friday, I'm too exhausted to try to figure out how to pack my bags and fly home. So I go home the next day. And I'm usually pretty much a physical wreck by then. But it is such wonderful, rewarding work. Your days begin at about 7 or 7:30 in the morning with committee meetings and so forth. And they generally don't end until 9 or 10, sometimes 11 o'clock at night after other committee meetings, and sometimes special dinners and whatnot. Food, fellowship, and worship are also a huge part of what we do at General Convention. And so that figures in mightily. So at this General Convention, Mike.
So how many people attend?
Well, in overall attendance, most cities can anticipate being descended upon by about 10,000 Episcopalians. There are about 850 in the House of Deputies, about 150 in the House of Bishops. But then you've got scores of volunteers. The alternates, most dioceses send at least one of their alternates. Most dioceses send some of their staff. And then visitors, interested parties, convention geeks like me who didn't get elected also will show up. And so oftentimes, and the cool part about that, Mike, is the worship. You know what the difference is between how different it feels when you attend a service here at St. Bartholomew's and there are a few people present versus a service here that is packed. Don't those services that are packed just feel amazing? So imagine worshiping with 10,000 Episcopalians in one venue. It is awesome. It's just absolutely amazing. So, for example, this year, one of the highlights this year was a major service that was styled by the presiding bishop. Quiz, who is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church?
Curry.
Michael Curry. Amazing man, amazing preacher. If you watched the royal wedding, there he was. So he decided that he was going to have, I would say, a good old-fashioned Episcopal revival, but I think there's probably no such thing that there is now. We had a revival meeting. It was incredible. One of the things that made it incredible is that we have some folks who are dedicated to serving the Episcopal Church through their interpretation skills. A team particularly of hearing impaired interpretation. So Bishop Curry has this one favorite I've known her for years and she's a peach. Her name is Denora Prado. Denora is a Spanish language interpreter, and she's also, in my opinion, an artist. So the bishop, if you've ever watched him preach, he never stays at the pulpit. The bishop was walking all over the stage in this just amazing, emotive sermon. And Denora was scurrying around after him and sometimes having to peer around in front of him to look at his face. It was amazing. But she's called an interpreter and not a translator because she truly interprets what he's saying. And that includes his emotion and his gestures and whatnot. And so it was delightful, but it was a wonderful service. Yes, we were at that service picketed by the, they're such delightful people, I always block out their name. The Phelps family, who regularly picket things that the Episcopal Church does. They particularly like to picket and protest at funerals, and particularly military funerals, because for some reason or other their version of love and generosity and Christian spirit isn't the same as ours. Is that a diplomatic way to say it? They're pretty filled with hate, and it's a shame. But they were there picketing and protesting, and son of a gun if our tour buses didn't block their view. So that was fine, but the service itself was magnificent, and that was also the Diocese of Texas night. And so from the service, we walked outside into this wonderful open venue, and they had music going, and they had food vendors, and they had beverage available to, well, I shouldn't say food vendors. None of it cost any money. They had food providers and beverage purveyors and whatnot, and it was a really wonderful, delightful evening, kind of like an enormous cocktail hour. Well, it was that too, but an enormous coffee hour, let's put it that way. So lots of good fellowship and fun among everybody. So what are some of the highlights of what we accomplished? Yes, ma'am.
This family, I'm not familiar with them. How many people are we talking about?
Oh, it's not a very big family. Maybe a dozen. Danny?
Polly, is this the fundamentalist group out of Kansas?
Yes.
And they're very much against gays, and they're very, very extreme fundamentalists.
That's right.
They're
And
in the news.
Okay,
they're in
that's
the
what I
news
was
a lot.
thinking. Thank you, Danny.
Right.
Thanks
And they
for
love
the
to try to shout us down, and so we just pray them back. Yeah, so they're pretty hard
obnoxious.
line, and yeah.
Sounds
So we
like-
tried really hard to ignore them. So
Yeah.
so what are some of the highlights of what happened at this general convention? As I think I mentioned, we dealt with over 500 different resolutions on almost as many topics. But what the committee's attempt to do is to take those resolutions and organize them, put it that way. And when we have resolutions that are redundant, to try to meld them and perfect them is the language that we use, to get them into a slightly more manageable state. No resolution comes to the floor of convention without having first had a hearing in a committee meeting. So imagine that a lot of hearings were held. Some of them no one appeared for, and if no one appeared, that was fine, we moved forward. But every resolution was provided the opportunity for folks to come and talk about it and let us know, let each committee know how they felt about it. And then the committee took those resolutions, dealt with them, tweaked them perhaps, modified them perhaps, rewrote them perhaps, and then sent them forward to the convention with their recommendation to either adopt the resolution, adopt it with amendment, take no further action on it, reject it, or refer it to another committee, usually to an interim body. There are a number of interim bodies that meet during the triennium between conventions that deal with a great deal of the work of the church between those triennial conventions. So once the work, Mike?
I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Can you take questions as we're going?
Of course I can.
So I remember seeing something out of our diocese about the resolutions. So are all the resolutions given the strength of a diocese, or could I offer a resolution to a committee if I knew about it? Is it individual, or is it,
question.
how do they get up?
Resolutions can be submitted by deputies to general convention, by dioceses, by committees that are the interim committees, by legislative committees, and by bishops. So, Joe Average in the pew, who is not a deputy to general convention, cannot of their own volition support and propose a resolution. But that doesn't keep you from finding out who your deputies are and see if you can work to create a coalition around that resolution and bring it forward in that manner. Denny?
So Polly, if, for an example, me being a member of St. Bart's, if I want to do a resolution, where would I go realistically? Would it be to you?
Probably yes. I mean, the easiest path for you in this scenario, the easiest path for you would be to come to me. If you knew someone who was serving on an interim body committee, like in the last triennium, I was the chair of the Standing Commission on Structure, Governance, Constitution, and Canons, or as we sometimes called it, the Standing Commission on Everything Except Liturgy and Music, because it was pretty comprehensive. We went from, an aside, we went from 14 standing commissions to 2. One of them I chaired, the other one was the Standing Commission on Liturgy and Music. We reinstated one legislative committee, one interim committee, one joint standing commission at convention, and that was on world mission. So then the resolutions do their thing, they live in the committees do their thing, they send them forward, they send their children to school to see what's going to happen to them. Once they get to the floor, the Committee on Dispatch orders them puts them in the order that we're going to discuss them, and they come forward one at a time. As each resolution comes forward, members are the committee president, the committee chair, introduces that resolution, provides whatever background information is appropriate, and then the floor is opened to debate. Through the course of that debate, arguments are made, pro and con. There are time limitations for each individual speaker, and there are time limitations on each topic, each resolution. Otherwise, I'd still be there. So as you may recall, this was 2 weeks in July in Austin, Texas. And it was hot and humid, and most of us wanted to go home. But we were so grateful to be there and to be doing the work. But I wouldn't want to still be there because we had no time limits. So what happened at this General Convention? A lot, but let me run you through some of the highlights. If my computer comes back up. So one of the early and very important things that was done was that the Episcopal Church invited La Iglesia Episcopal de Cuba, invited the Episcopal Church in Cuba back into the fold. There are those canonically who would say they never left. There are those who say they withdrew. There are those who say we turned them away. And the church decided, let's put all of those arguments aside and just invite them back. So the Episcopal Church in Cuba was brought back into the Episcopal Church, the global Episcopal Church. There are still some issues to deal with. We will be looking at that at a diocesan level as well as church-wide. For example, during the period that they were not active in the Episcopal Church, the United States was not able to send money to Cuba, so we sent it through Canada. But we were not able to send enough money to fund their pension contributions, and so there is a shortfall in the amount of money at the pension fund to cover their clergy. That shortfall, we believe, the number varies, but we believe that shortfall is around $800,000. So Bishop Catherine has suggested that if every Episcopalian were to give 50 cents, we could fund the contribution. So you may see an initiative coming forward before too long to try to tackle that. Because as you can well imagine, the Episcopal Church in Cuba does not have $800,000 lying around.
How big is that church?
Not large at all. Very important, but not huge. Bishop Griselda was at our convention. We sort of ceremonially seated her in the House of Bishops and seated her husband, who was a representative of the clergy, seated him in the House of Deputies in order to make the point that they are once again a part of the church. So the Episcopal Church in Cuba is not large. I don't know exactly how many clergy, but I'm going to say that it's certainly not, it's not more than a couple of dozen. So it's pretty small, but very important. So another issue that was a hot button issue for us was the compensation of the President of the House of Deputies. The President of the House of Deputies is either a layperson or a priest, and when that person is a layperson, then the Vice President is a priest and vice versa, or deacon. Right now, the President of the House of Deputies is a woman by the name of Gay Clark Jennings. And Gay Jennings is a priest, so the Vice President of the House of Deputies right now is a man by the name of Byron Rushing. And Byron is a member of the state legislature in the state of Massachusetts, and a pretty amazing man in his own right. So Gay, having been elected by the House of Deputies to serve as our president, has been unbelievably busy in that role. I have in the past served Gay Clark Jennings, her predecessor Bonnie Anderson, who was a laywoman, her predecessor George Werner, who was a priest. That's sort of my history in the House. A president of the House of Deputies can be elected to a 3-year term and can be elected to 3 consecutive 3-year terms. Bonnie Anderson served 6 years. George Werner served 6 years because he was not reelected a deputy from his diocese because he was in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, which was going through its own upheavals and changes as the church was going through its changes. So so presidents of the House of Deputies usually serve in the past, they've served 6 to 9 years. But as I say, it's 3 consecutive 3-year terms is what is permitted. So the President of the House of Deputies' role over the years has expanded tremendously. And probably one of the most important things that the President does is appoint well over 800 people to various offices and committees and commissions across the church. In order to do that, that person needs to get to know the people of the church across the church. Consequently, that person does a great deal of traveling, goes to many, many diocesan conventions, goes to many church-wide events, some at the provincial level, some at the diocesan level, some that are truly church-wide, and it is truly a full-time job. There are those who were not happy about the idea of compensating this person. There were some who thought that by compensating the President of the House of Deputies, it made that person equal to the President of the House of Bishops. And I think most of us who supported the compensation issue would most heartily say, no, not even close. All it's doing is recognizing out of a sense of justice that this person deserves to be compensated. It also emphasizes from a justice perspective the fact that in order to do this job, you really have to be either or both retired and or independently wealthy. So if you think about that, that basically precludes a whole lot of people from serving the church, including those who may have the time and the energy and the skill sets to do it, but not the money, or don't have necessarily the funding or the employment opportunity to do it because they have to work. There are ways to do this job that could be, it's still a full-time job, but as most of us know, it's possible to do 2 full-time jobs at the same time. So, excuse me, it really became a question of justice, and forgive me. This convention finally, we've been talking about this for close to 20 years, and this convention finally said, yes, it is time to start compensating the President of the House. The President of the House of Deputies is the only officer of the Episcopal Church who was not being compensated in any way. So that has now been rectified. It was a subject of not an inconsequential amount of debate, but it's now settled. And the issue will now go to the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church to determine the how much and how and so forth on that point. So speaking of the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, while at General Convention, I was pretty much the recipient of 3 different, what I would call honors. One is that Province 8, which is the province in which our diocese is located. Basically, it's the Western United States. The Episcopal Church is divided into 9 provinces. The Episcopal Church in San Diego is located in Province 8, which is, as I said, the Western United States. I was elected by Province 8 as the secretary of our province. So I think that's going to be pretty awesome. I'm hoping that that will give us more of an opportunity to get more involved in Province 8 than we have been in the past. Our candidate of the ordinary, Nancy Holland, has invited me to get together with her in another couple of weeks to talk about that very issue. The second honor, I will call it, is that the House of Deputies elected me as a member of the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, which to people outside the church, I describe as the board of directors of the global Episcopal Church. And that's a 6-year term. I'm very excited about it. I'm very pleased to be there. I'm very pleased to bring the voice of the Episcopal Church on the left coast to the Episcopal Church. Because sometimes it feels a little bit like the Episcopal Church kind of forgets that we extend beyond the Mississippi River. Now, what's interesting about that too is that we also have from our province, and in fact from our diocese, Butch Glosson, whom some of you may know. Butch or Coach or Lewis are his many names, is a member of the church in Hemet. And he is also a member of the Executive Council. He was elected 3 years ago, and is just a wonderful, delightful, spirit-filled man. So that's cool and awesome. And then the third that absolutely blew me away, I was completely not expecting, was that the President of the House of Deputies has the ability to award the House of Deputies Medal to individuals who have served the church in a variety of ways, and I'm wearing it today. So I was the recipient of that, and our whole deputation was brought up on stage, and it was very cool. So I'm very pleased and very honored to.
Well, you are a church geek.
I am a church geek. I can't help myself.
Well, tell them about your heritage too. Your
Well,
father,
yeah.
your grandfather, your uncle.
My father was a priest of the church for 62 years, and my brother, who is retired now, is also a priest and has been for about 35 years. So, and all of us kids were named for the church's dad was rector of when we were born. We kind of can't help ourselves. Okay.
So is there a St. Pauli?
There should be.
Oh, I know.
No, but it was, for me, it was St. Paul's in San Rafael, California, so I was named Pauline. So, some of the other things we did. We do business type things, and we deal with the canons of the church, but we also do a lot of social justice things. So, for example, one day, about 1,000 of us got on a bunch of buses that had been provided by Trinity Church Wall Street. And we rode out to the Hutto Detention Center, where a number of refugee women were being housed who had been separated from their, for the most part, separated from their children at the border when they were seeking asylum and refugee status. So we went out there and we had a prayer meeting. And they kept us a distance from the center, but we were told that our voices were still heard over there. Some of our group, including some of you might know Colin Mathewson. He's the rector at St. Mark's in City Heights. Yeah, he's hard to miss. He's 6'10". And Colin was kind of looking around in Colin's way, and he kind of looked over and he saw that there was a pathway that you could take to walk around this field to get over to the detention center. And he thought, yeah, let's see what that is. And so a whole bunch of people from the back of the group kind of peeled off and just started walking over there. And they got really close when the security guards, because this is one of the private detention centers, the security guards stopped them, but not before they got close enough to see that there were women at the windows with their hands on the windows, waving to them. And in some cases, putting pieces of paper up on the glass so that they were more visible, so they could be seen. And that was pretty powerful. And then one of the women inside the detention center subsequently called one of the organizers who is there a lot, and told her that she should communicate to us that our voices and our songs could be heard inside, and they could see us, and that they knew that we were there, and how grateful they were for that. So that was an amazing experience for me. I'd never done anything like that before, and it was, for me, very profound. So that was that one. Another one that was controversial in that it was controversial because, again, not everybody agrees on this topic, which is fine. I mean, that's the thing that's so wonderful about the Episcopal Church. There are lots of opinions and there's room for them all. But there is a subset of our House of Bishops called Bishops United Against Gun Violence. 3 years ago in Salt Lake City, the bishops all got together in their, it's called Ratchet and Shamir, part of their normal bishop vestments, the red robes with the white thingy over it, and with the red thingy over it, and the ruffles on their sleeves and whatnot. And because they make a beautiful, image. I mean, they're just a spectacle when they get together like that. And they marched through the streets of Salt Lake City to make the point. And they started with a gathering in a park, and then they marched. And that was pretty profound. This time in Austin, there wasn't the time or the opportunity to create a march, but they did have a gathering in a park that was right across the street from the convention center. And many of us attended that gathering. One of the speakers were the family of a teenager who was killed at the Marjorie, why can I never remember the, thank you, school in that shooting. Another was a young woman whose name was Abigail, and she was introduced by her bishop as the prophet Abigail. And she was 14 years old, and she was so articulate in talking about the impact of all of this on her and her life and her family and whatnot, and what she was hoping the grown-ups in this country would do to address that. But I mean, we had members in our deputation who do not support tighter gun controls. One gal in our deputation used to work for the Immigration Service. So obviously, opinions differ. And what's wonderful about convention is that we're pretty good there about having respectful dialogue about issues we don't agree on. And that was very wonderful. So what other kinds of things did we do? The presiding bishop arranged for what he called Tech Talks, a takeoff on TED Talks. He had, he set aside 3 sessions that, as joint sessions, joint meaning bring the House of Bishops into the House of Deputies, and we sat together. And the Tech Talks were around the 3 pillars of the Jesus movement. And let's hope I remember them. Care of creation, evangelism, and racial reconciliation. Those were profound opportunities. They were just amazing. And in each case, he brought in speakers to talk to us about their perspective, their viewpoint, their experience, whatever. And then we broke into our groups by deputations and had dialogue among ourselves with questions similar to the questions that you all have probably experienced in Bible studies. What did you hear? What struck you? And ultimately, what do you see as the church's imperative? What should we do next as a result of all of this? So those were wonderful conversations, and hopefully some good things will come of those dialogues. A lot of people ask questions about the Book of Common Prayer. What's happening with the Book of Common Prayer? You probably know that most of us, because there's a little gray hair in the room, most of us grew up on the 1928 prayer book. The book we use now is the 1979 prayer book. In the intervening 50 some odd years, a big chunk of time was spent getting to that 1979 prayer book. We went through the Green Book and the Zebra Book and whatnot. There were all sort of trials of what might be, and ultimately we ended up with the one we have now. Well, it's been another 50 some odd years, and there are people who think it's time for us to take another look at it. They've been trying to do that for some time now, and it's all along the way. It's been, no, let's not monkey with that book. Let's not play with that book. Let's adopt trial liturgies. Let's adopt the Book of Occasional Services. Let's adopt Cloud of Witnesses, yada yada. Holy men, holy women. And those are all sort of supplemental to the Book of Common Prayer. So at this convention, we did not approve adopting a new prayer book. We certainly did not adopt a new prayer book. We adopt a process for moving forward to revise the prayer book, which, we as Episcopalians are kind of cautious. We don't do things very fast. And so that's fine. At least we will be continuing to move forward in that regard, and we will be doing a lot of heavy listening in that respect. One of the unintended, perhaps, I don't know, maybe it was intended, who knows, consequences of that is that there was also conversation around the liturgies with respect to same-sex unions and marriage. And what do we do with those marriage rights, and where do they live? Well, a couple of things have happened. One was, a resolution was approved to memorialize the 1979 prayer book, which means that no matter what happens going forward, the 1979 prayer book will always be a part of our ethos. It will always be there. It will always be something that we are permitted to use, quite frankly. So that's one piece. The other thing that happened was that by postponing the process, the folks who support marriage rights for same-sex couples are having a little bit of indigestion, because it means that that is still considered to be what they euphemistically refer to as a stepchild or whatever, because it's not in the book. It's in a book, and it's an authorized book, but it's not the book. So, right or wrong, just so you understand that that's where that's coming from. It's a little bit troubling, but it's out there. So that's that piece of it.
So the headline,
Yes.
the headline I read was Episcopal Church gets rid of the term father in all of its right.
Okay, that is another piece that was addressed. What we did was we approved the use of inclusive language. We did not mandate the use of inclusive language, but we approved it. So at St. Bart's, you will often hear or see inclusive language already being used in the liturgy. For example, what's the line at the beginning of the service? Where instead of using him or her, we'll substitute with the word God, for example. We've been doing it all along. Now it's not against the rules. So, how much of that gets incorporated into the revisions to the prayer book, who knows? That's yet to be seen. I mean, quite frankly, on the one hand, I'm a pretty progressive gal. On the other hand, it kind of irritated me when they went and revised a whole bunch of our Christmas carols and changed the language to be inclusive. But that's just me. So, basically, nothing dramatic, but permissive around that one. Okay, the convention happened right smack in the middle of the Me Too movement. Consequently, the President of the House of Deputies appointed a special committee that ultimately consisted of, I want to say, 47 people, all of whom, oh, by the way, happen to be women, and divided them into 5 different subcommittees on a variety of issues related to women and the treatment of women and issues around women. There was one on theology. There were a number of them. I actually served on one of them, and those subcommittees, those special subcommittees, did not have formal standing. So whatever work we did had to then be brought forward by individual deputies, because we were not a committee of the General Convention. And so as a result, there was a lot of work done around that. The resolution that came out of the Diocese of San Diego around trauma-informed care was, we did 2 things with that. Our diocese memorialized that resolution to the General Convention, which meant that it was given to the whole of convention and read to one of the legislative committees. But we also then took that resolution and wrote another resolution specifically for General Convention, and that resolution was ultimately adopted. And it was adopted in pretty dramatically different form, but it did get, a portion of it got included now in the canons to call for appropriately trained and educated folk to assist in the treatment of victims of sexual abuse by clergy. So those pieces were well done, I think. There is a task force on sexual harassment that has been formed, and they'll be doing a lot of work during the interim. And it hopes to extend canonical consequences to the laity when they engage in inappropriate sexual conduct in the context of the church. And let me give you an example, because some folks say, well, what's that all about? You can't do that. So here's unfortunately, one of the most common examples. A female rector has a male senior warden who's a bit of a bully. We have had way too many female clergy being grabbed inappropriately by lay people, especially laymen in the church. What is the recourse for that person? Well, the guy who grabbed her is not a member of the clergy, and therefore Title IV does not apply. So what do? It's not an employee of the church, so what do? The only recourse left to that person is legal recourse through the courts. That priest is not going to want to go do that. So what do? So we are trying to look at that. No ultimate decisions have been made, but the charge has been given to that task force to look at that and see what we can do. How can we make the church a safer place, a more appropriate place for everyone? Excuse me. For everyone. So that work will be going on. We also, one of the challenges that we've had in the Episcopal Church, and this is not unique to us, is, as you know, we are in full communion with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. That means that there are some Lutheran clergy serving in Episcopal congregations. Unfortunately, and it has happened in this diocese, we have had more than one occasion where a Lutheran pastor in an Episcopal setting has engaged in inappropriate sexual activity with members of the congregation. Unfortunately, again, that's a Lutheran pastor. They're not bound by the canons of the Episcopal Church. So we can't discipline them under Title IV. So the consequence of that has been very uncomfortable conversation and dialogue between the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese and the bishop of the Lutheran Synod on what to do with that pastor. There has been in the past a reluctance to share information for privacy concerns and goodness only knows what else. So we are working on that, and one of the things that we've done is canonically strongly encouraged them to engage in more dialogue among the bishops and giving them more freedom to talk to each other and try to make things work. The Lutherans actually do have a system of discipline, they just don't use it as well as we do. And that's personal opinion, but based on experience, but we're trying to address those concerns. Remember,
Couldn't they just refer that, Paul?
I'm sorry?
That offending person, couldn't they just go to the Lutheran Council or whatever it's called, or Synod, I suppose, and tell them what went on, and can't they discipline their own people?
They certainly can. The challenge is what happens to the victim. The victims are traumatized and re-traumatized by the process, and there is very little, up to this point, there's been very little communication back about what happens in that process. We, for example, had a situation here where the Lutheran process was engaged, but they didn't talk to the victim. And it made for further challenges. So I thought about Bishop Kafidi a lot this summer because there was a lot of conversation around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what we do about all of that. We, as the Episcopal Church, we did not actually take sides, but we did approve resolutions talking about safeguarding the rights of Palestinian children, pursuing peace in Gaza, and continuing our work toward a negotiated peace. So we didn't do anything dramatic except what I personally think was the right thing from a Christian and Episcopal perspective. About that one, I talked about that one, and talked about that one. So I guess the two remaining pieces I would mention that have nothing to do with resolutions. One was food. Holy Toledo. Have you all ever been to Austin? You can't turn around without tripping over a restaurant with awesome food. So we did our best to support the economy of Texas and especially of the city of Austin by doing our bit to eat as much Tex-Mex food as we possibly could. The food there was wonderful, and the food in the exhibit hall was wonderful. If you've never been to a general convention, you ought to. We have an exhibit hall that we call Episcopal Retail Therapy that is pretty amazing. And the food all over the place, you know, guacamole, chicken fried steak, oh my gosh, just amazing food. And I think one of the other highlights, there always seems to be a comedic moment during convention, and this one for us was the pigeon. Now, during the presiding bishop's initial joint communication to us, he referred to it as a dove. We did some research and we found out that in fact this pigeon was a rock dove, and it had a family, and we found out from the staff that they actually lived in the convention center. And they made appearances at all the appropriate moments. And it was wonderful because it provided just enough comic relief to keep us, on our toes. So, without getting into the hundreds and hundreds of resolutions that we addressed, I think those are probably for me I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm doing that, although I'm a little bit lightheaded this morning. So I would open it to you all. What other questions do you have?
So Molly, I'm familiar with this issue with the Lutheran pastor, at least at a superficial level. And it seems to me part of the problem is when we enter into communion with another church, just as we're currently in trial communion with the Methodist Church, this is a big hole.
Right.
And I know we're in trial communion now with our Methodist friends, and we're in communion, for example, with the Moravian Church.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, in the Moravian Church, deacons consecrate.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we went into full communion with them, it was very clearly stipulated that deacons will, in the Moravian Church, will not consecrate. Okay, in the Episcopal Church. So is the convention, is she looking in some way with the executive council at how we plug these canonical holes when we're in communion? Because they're pretty significant, like the one you just mentioned, and there are others.
Right. Right. Well, what we're asking is that call to common mission, for example, which is the name of the agreement between the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church, be revisited to determine what holes are in there. Obviously, if a Lutheran pastor is serving in an Episcopal congregation, they can their employment can be terminated. The bishop can terminate their license to function. But they can't require that the Lutheran pastor submit to the canons of the Episcopal Church. And so we're having to look carefully at all of those pieces and figure out what we can do. So, don't know.
There was another area there that was very embarrassing for deacons at the renewal of the vows, which this year was in the Lutheran Church down in San Diego. Deacons were not considered ordained. When it came to the renewal of the vows, the Lutheran bishop, asked them to stand over in the corner with the laity, because you really aren't ordained. And that was really a put there.
Yeah.
In addition to that, he never invited the assisting bishop, Catherine, to co-preside with him. So there were some things there that a lot of us who were, like you've been long-term members of the church, looked at and said, how can you be in full communion with the Lutheran Church when there's these kind of incongruities between the churches?
Right. Yeah. Well, and as I say, there are no easy answers, and the group that's been pulled together to look at this will be addressing all of that by reviewing the agreements. I also reached out to Bishop Rice of the Diocese of San Joaquin, who serves on the committee that's looking at the Methodist piece, and brought the issue to his attention so that it would stay on the agenda for those conversations. Yeah. So I did that, and he assured me that they absolutely were going to keep that on the radar screen.
So Polly, are the Methodists trying to come into the Episcopal Church with the same type of agreement with the Lutherans?
Yes, they are.
But the Methodists don't even use wine for communion, they use grape juice, that's gonna be a big.
Well, that's why the conversations aren't over yet.
And by the way, this happened at our renewal of vows too. They distributed a whole bunch of little cups of Welch's grape juice.
Well, that's okay. If you've ever been to a communion service at a Mormon church, they distribute little cups of water.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's
Heard that.
I gotta get to work.
Yep. Any other, you bet, Bill, thank you. Any other questions, inquiries, concerns, curiosities? Mike?
I mentioned when we talked about the Book of Prayer thing, the headline that you saw about the father, and then you talked about the Palestinian Jewish thing. The headline you saw was those Episcopalians, they're walking away from the Jewish state. I wondered, does the convention hold regular media briefings? Do they give?
That's a really good point. Yes.
Those of us in the Episcopal Church, I think, know that we don't turn on a dime.
Yeah.
So
Well, and the other thing is
the headlines that come out during the general convention seem to be, like a lot of other things, pretty
Fake.
So,
Vague. Or sensationalistic, you know?
so there are a couple of things. One is that yes, in fact, there are daily press briefings. There are representatives of the church who are assigned daily to participate in those press briefings. The other thing is, even within the church, we have the conservative press and the liberal press. So, for example, the Living Church tends to be more conservative, and the Episcopal News Service tends to be more liberal. So, just as with the secular media, you have to pay attention to the source and watch for that piece. So, for example, when they're talking about Episcopal Church turns its back on Israel, it's probably because we supported continuing to look out for the interests and the rights of Palestinian children, because that's what we do. I don't care where the children are from. I don't care if they're Israeli or Palestinian. We don't beat up on children. So what's interesting is that a lot of the political issues are addressed by the church not from a political perspective, but from a social justice perspective. What is the right thing to do? How do we take care of people? And I think that's predominantly, I think that's what we see in our dialogue within the church. And yes, it often gets reported out in strange and interesting ways.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure,
Very-
happy to do
very
it, and I'm always available to answer further questions if anyone has them.
Thanks, Paul.
You bet.
Thank you.